Happy Memorial Day, and while most of you are probably spending this day at barbecues or pools, I'm Jay, and I'm an absolute loser who reads comic books all day instead. So, let's get into it. Before I even start, I want to be honest about a few things. One, my first actual interaction with Peacemaker as a character was not his comics. It was not his TV show, and it was not the Suicide Squad movies. It was reading Blue Beetle 2006. I mean, I knew about Peacemaker before that, but I hadn't thought about him for more than a second, of vaguely being like, oh yeah, that guy's kind of popular with the general public, I think. Anyways, moving on, after reading Blue Beetle, I considered him a real character. Number two, my brother was in the Air Force for a time. I don't know how long to be real. I don't ask his opinions about comic book things because he thinks Lobo's an anti-hero, and so asking him things pisses me off an unreasonable amount. Whatever, back to comic book land and Peacemaker time. Originally created in Fightin' 5, number 40 by Joe Gill and Pat Boyette, published by Charlatan Comics in 1966, making Peacemaker a character made in the same universe as Captain Atom, Blue Beetle, The Question, and Nightshade. Because of this, he's often seen alongside them, even after Charlatan's characters were acquired by DC in 1983. Since I'm a DC person, I'm going to cover Peacemaker's appearances after this acquisition, so for a majority of this, post-crisis and onwards. And having read this post-crisis stuff, I feel like there's a major tonal difference to the character in the 80s, post-9/11, and modern era interpretations of Peacemaker. But I feel like to really understand what I'm saying, you have to first look at the original post-crisis. God bless America. Make a move extreme. Shortcut to your dream. Upload straight to the stars on that flying thing. The 80s were definitely an interesting time for comic books. Not necessarily my favorite time, but an important one for Christopher Smith. Man, it's weird to call him Chris. He's one of those characters that you just can't first name. Some characters are first name characters, and some are codename characters. Peacemaker is a codename character. Well, moving on. The 80s had Peacemaker involved in a lot of things, from Checkmate to Suicide Squad to his own 4-issue mini. His backstory at the time essentially went that his father was a weapons manufacturer in Austria hiding a Nazi past, and following its reveal, kills himself in front of a young Peacemaker. On his birthday, no less. But that doesn't mean that that's the last we see of him. From that point on, he regularly shows up as a hallucination of Peacemaker's, forcing him to push himself harder and become worse and worse. At 18, Peacemaker gets to the military and participates in the Vietnam War. Hearing the voice of his father in his head, he's driven to head a massacre of civilians. This gets him court-martialed and given a 20-year prison sentence. He's bailed out in exchange for participating in the government's Project Peacemaker. Little does he know, he is the entire project. Fully believing that the souls of the people he kills go into his helmet and talk to him, and still with the voice of his father in his head, he becomes a one-man anti-terrorism force for the United States. The entire time he believes it to be a personal choice. He doesn't know that he's been programmed by the state, or that every single person around him, from his maid to his girlfriend, is a government agent there to control his actions and influence his thoughts and missions. 80s Peacemaker is a tale of an exploited mentally ill war vet, used as an agent of justice with little free will of his own. Any mental health services provided during this time are all with the intent of further influencing his actions. Following the Vietnam War, studies were done that showed that veterans who fought directly in the war had much higher rates of psychiatric disorders, according to the National Library of Medicine. Despite Vietnam War vets being integral to the recognition of PTSD as a medical condition, overall very little mental health care and support was actually provided to these veterans. In general, Vietnam War vets were treated less than incredibly upon their return home from service. The stigmatization led to even less support from the communities to the people who needed support the most. And with all this shady stuff the government loves doing, it isn't exactly out of character for them to take a vet with a bad rep and no living relatives to use for their own goals, taking advantage of pre-existing issues to program him to do whatever they want, especially when he's proven he's so ready to kill to keep what he thinks is the peace, and how willing he is to listen to someone telling him what to do. Come 1993, he dies, and we don't see him again for another 13 years. Then he's resurrected in 2006 to play Mentor, and let's just say things were pretty different after 9/11. The primary thing Peacemaker was up to in the aughts, and his longest running recurring appearance for Peacemaker ever, was mostly in Blue Beetle 2006. Here, he plays a hard-ass, all-American ex-military mentor to our young protagonist. But here's where further shift really is. All of a sudden it seems Peacemaker is cool. He wasn't all too cool of a guy before, but now here he is being a kick-ass cool guy with tattoos and a motorcycle who teaches the new Blue Beetle everything he needs to know. And alongside being cool, he also gets far more patriotic with his goals rather than just being an agent of peace. He's not fighting against terrorists anymore. Instead, he's joining in on patrolling the United States-Mexico border. He's trying to prevent deaths, but also holding up something that is very much a specifically American issue rather than one in the hunt for peace, and all of a sudden, he's seemingly cured of all mental health issues, symptoms, and hallucinations. Not only is he now cool, he's also a picture of American exceptionalism. Reminders of the past were limited to a one-panel joke in the middle of an issue that's barely touched on. This Peacemaker is a free agent. He isn't being controlled or manipulated. He knows who he is and what he is, and displays a little embarrassment at the reminder of his costume crime fighting in the 1980s. This Peacemaker is usually a hero. This Peacemaker is cool. Following 9/11, there was a boost to American patriotism and starting a more conservative shift to the nation. It changed the way that Americans thought of those not from the States, and also about those within it and who serve it. It also brought about the War on Terror, and it's the War on Terror happening at the time that I feel was the reason for Peacemaker's revival as opposed to one of the other charlatan characters, or charlatan-adjacent characters. Peacemaker was the kind of character that suited the times, and I'm sure the editorial felt it was necessary to have that all-American perspective in a book that was very much not about the white man's experience. It needed a white man, and who better than a character suited to be the ultimate white man, Peacemaker. The all-American hero who mows down terrorists in his spare time and loves peace so much he'd kill for it, even if he does denounce his old catchphrase. Then there's what had to be the wildest shift in Peacemaker's characterization, which also seems to coincide with his newfound popularity as a character. Now we come to the current era, where things are very different. I feel like this was probably Rebirth's fault. I would typically blame New 52, but he blessedly wasn't there. But what blew it all out of the water was the Suicide Squad movie and Peacemaker TV show. This Peacemaker has a bit of a different backstory here. His racist asshole father trains him from a young age to be a soldier for his specific brand of all-American justice. He tries to be a diplomat, but when that doesn't work out, he starts going out as a vigilante to try and get peace any way he can. At first glance, you see a total asshole who would do anything for the sake of the American flag. No one likes him, he sucks, not a fun character. Then you look a little deeper, and upon looking a little deeper, it seems like you've got back a little bit of the original character from the 80s. You have him talking to his helmet in Inferior 5. You have him being haunted by the hallucinations of his father in the TV show. He may still come off a certain way, but there's more there, and Peacemaker is coming back to his roots. But while someone looking closely may see the remnants of the original mentally ill war vet that Peacemaker used to be, the general public just sees an ultra-patriotic douchebag with a flagpole up his ass and America bread and everything. No one seems to see past it. This seems to line up pretty well with what we see nowadays. Things are changing, and in a way, starting to go back a while. Anti-war movements are back in the public consciousness and are back with a vengeance. Things aren't slowing down anytime soon, and the greater view of the military isn't all that great anymore. The view of the ultra-patriotic is equally as spotty. Then again, I can't imagine they were always a particularly loved group. The modern Peacemaker is still ultra-American, fighting for the ideals of the government that he's back to being used by and manipulated by, and alongside that, he isn't seen as that great of a person, more obsessed with the nation than the sanctity of human lives. People don't like him. His team doesn't, Rick Flag doesn't, most people he interacts with don't. He's an asshole. But still, he keeps on evolving. I find it very interesting the way that a relatively obscure character has evolved alongside the perceptions of a nation, and it really makes you wonder how this character will change even more over the next 40 years. But that's pretty far from now. For now, I guess I'll just have to wait for season 2 of the show and keep on reading what comes out. Or, until next time, listeners.